service programs and the NDIS have got a lot of experience and expertise there with everyone today. So please make them welcome. Thank you, Leith. As Leith said, I'm Pam, this is Paul, and we're both from Woden Community Service. We've both been involved in rolling out our NDIS program as well as delivering a whole range of other mental health programs. More recently, I've actually just stepped back from managing the NDIS, but Paul asked me to come and help him today because this is a presentation that we delivered at the Community Mental Health Australia Conference last November with some tweaks. And probably what I need to say is now Paul is our Chief NDIS Manager in terms of continuing on with Woden. Woden has both a disability program as well as a mental health program in the NDIS, it's like a social disability program, and it's been quite an interesting, a lot of similarities but also a different journey for both those programs. As Leith pointed out, we were very determined to try and embrace recovery in the NDIS. It's the heart and centre of what we do at Woden. All our outreach work, all our different programs have a recovery element. And when we sat down and looked as to whether we were going to take up the NDIS, we said, we're only going to do it if we can try and find a way of doing it within a recovery framework. So what we're talking today is about how we've done that. It's far from easy and it's constantly challenged. Sometimes we've had to really hang on and stick to our guns, and we've actually had to really have some significant arguments with people around town about what we're doing, but we keep trying and we keep pushing. And we've got some stories that we're going to share with you initially before we start to talk about what our model is. So I'm going to hand over to Paul.
Thanks, mate. I might start with John's story. John is a young man with a complex history of psychosis and substance use and unsafe public housing. Mental health and community services had failed him over many years. He was lonely and vulnerable, particularly to those who would take advantage of him and exploit his desire to have fun. His mental health severely reduced his ability to maintain his home, let alone be safe. Despite the efforts of his parents to improve his circumstances over many years, his physical and mental health deteriorated. He almost died of a serious co-occurring medical condition several years ago. This is, of course, a common story among many people who fall through the gaps in our mental health services. But then things started to change. After being medically treated, John was admitted to a longer-term psychiatric rehab centre, where he stayed for 18 months. While in this facility, John agreed his substance use had to change. And at the same time, he was assisted in gaining access to the NDIS. Public housing also came on board and granted him a transfer to a small, quiet housing complex not far from his parents. For the first time since leaving home, he had a safe place to live, and he was ready to make some of his own personal changes to ensure it stayed that way. John's parents ensured he was at the centre of decision-making concerning his future and transition back into the community, and John was determined to succeed this time. He received an excellent first NDIS plan, which we were approached to coordinate and help implement. We were all pretty new to the NDIS at that stage, but everyone came to the party. John, his parents, the clinical team, housing, and using the NDIS funding, we began to engage services to firstly assist with the transition from the residential facility to his home, and then to establish services and supports to continue along that road of recovery for John. During the first year of John's NDIS plan, the focus was on basic capacity building. To build with John his greater independence in the community, his ability to maintain his home and sustain his tenancy, to assist with motivation around better nutrition, habits of physical health and exercise, as well as some social activity. That year, with assistance, John attended summer camps in Canberra, and we discovered he was a bit of a motorhead. We were assisting John to attend medical and clinical appointments and with medication, as well as seeing his clinical manager regularly. But he is now getting his regular blood tests, picking up his medication and seeing his clinical manager independently. What we created is not perfect, and John's parents are still there filling in the gaps in the system. This does highlight the issue of carers in the NDIS and how they are supported, and no doubt we'll hear more of that later today. As many of you have experienced, nothing is straightforward in the world of the NDIS. A lot of effort went into the review process for John's second NDIS plan last year. John and all the main players in his support team were at the review meeting, but despite all our efforts, John's support funding was slashed by 80%. It was truly devastating. John's mum largely took up the fight as we stepped across that thin ice of advocacy in this brave new world of the NDIS. But on this occasion, thankfully, we succeeded in having most of his funding reinstated, despite some real sticking points that continue to disadvantage us as the service provider. How's John going now? Well, he's setting about proving his greater independence and own self-reliance to his parents, to us, and I suspect to himself. When his parents went overseas last year, John organised a trip to the Bathurst 1000 car races. He did all the homework for arranging the trip and saved enough money on his limited income. But we prevailed upon him to accept some support too. We organised for an NDIS support worker from Bathurst to meet him at the bus stop and to provide some support to John throughout the long weekend. John camped at the facilities there. It actually rained most of the weekend, apparently, but he really enjoyed himself. We need to remind ourselves that it had only been a year before that John was living in a psychiatric facility. There was some risk in this trip for John, but there's a dignity in that. He told his support coordinator later that there was a fair bit of drinking and the like going on in the crowds that weekend. But he told her, I don't do that stuff anymore. A bit of passion has a strong pull factor. On the road of recovery, he's now planning his next adventure.
This is a quote from John. Okay, so now I'm going to tell you the story of David. We've known David over many years through his episodic participation in the FAMS program. David is a bright, young, enthusiastic Aboriginal man, but over these years we've witnessed him suffer episodes of severe, debilitating anxiety along that complex spectrum of anxiety disorder. He has achieved extraordinary things, but he also finds himself withdrawn into isolation and, sadly, unlived life. With the transition of the mental health programs into the NDIS, we had no alternative but to help David apply for an individual funded NDIS package. It required enormous perseverance and advocacy by David, by his FAMS worker, providing evidence to prove the permanent nature of David's condition as a psychosocial disability is not language that we're comfortable with, and I know a lot of you aren't either. But when David did finally receive his first plan, there was another blow. To be frank, it was actually an insult to David and to us as specialised recovery-focused mental health services. If the plan was followed as funded, it would have been a 12-month exercise in dependency forming, in danger of facilitating David only becoming more stuck inside support services, or to further withdrawal and having nothing at all. So, with David's consent, we took the plan back to the NDIA for internal review. Happily, eventually, it took a very long time, David did finally receive a new, though very modest plan, but with the right mix of funding this time. We thought it could support recovery and not dependency. And that's the key thing that we feel is important in terms of the way we work. It allowed for good coordination, for some tailored therapies, for capacity building and graded exposure, and increased opportunities for social and community participation, including finding a job. Since they began working together, David's support coordinator has seen an amazing shift in David's self-confidence and capacity to enjoy life. Initially, he found David to be a shy and quite lonely man with few contacts outside his immediate family. But throughout the year, there have been steady gains in David's confidence, capacity to engage with others, and belief in himself. The NDIS has allowed David to have regular contact with a member of our team of peer support workers, of similar age and similar interests. These regular activities, co-designed with David, his coordinator, and his support worker, have resulted in him regaining confidence in himself, starting with regular mountain walks, which led to him joining in a local OzTag club and having increased fitness and general wellbeing. This increased confidence allowed him to begin volunteering with one of our after-school youth programs and to initiate casual games of touch footy amongst participants. He helped out at touch footy game that we organised at our Mental Health Week event last year. His father attended too and thanked David's coordinator for the support provided. He hadn't seen David travelling so well for a long time, and David was beaming with pride in himself. David has made several friends through our peer support groups. He began catching up with one of our other participants without support from us, and this friendship grew. We have a quote from David here. I can't believe that things are as good as they are now. I feel really proud of my volunteer work at the youth centre. Every week I get more comfortable with the work and the young people are starting to trust me and confide in me. I've never really had any close friends, and now I'm really enjoying spending time with Cameron, Jessie and Adam. Now, David's focus is on actually paid employment. He obtained some part-time work with the help of his coordinator and with a change in his job agency for some added support in the workplace. He has access to therapies to reinforce the progress made and to develop further coping strategies. We can report today that he has now a regular part-time job and has decided to give self-managing his NDIS plan a go, while maintaining a reduced contact with our services towards greater independence for himself. And we hope that the NDIS can be responsive enough to David's mental health condition and its episodic severity, because David is a perfect case example of how work in a recovery-focused way within the NDIS framework can, given particularly if it acknowledges the unpredictability and the episodic nature of mental illness, can actually increase his personal capacity, and that there is likelihood that David can eventually fulfil his goal of returning to full-time work and ultimately be free of the NDIS supports altogether. That's David's hope, and it's also our hope. So the question is, what have we done to actually allow stories like this to happen? Both really quite different stories, and David, we hope eventually will be able to move on from the NDIS. John is likely to remain in the NDIS, probably for the time of his life, but we have different ways of working and different things that we can talk about. So I'm going to hand back over to Paul to start talking about how we've achieved it.
So how have we achieved the kind of results that David and John have gained? For most of us in the community mental health sector, the transition to the NDIS has been a very bumpy ride. The concept of permanent disability, on which eligibility for the NDIS depends, does not sit well with the strength-based recovery approach we've so long embraced. But the NDIS is beginning to recognise that the NDIS is a new way of providing support to people with psychosocial disability. It professes to support a recovery approach, and, quoting from one of its fact sheets, it is committed to ensuring that recovery and hope-restoring recovery practice are supported for participants with psychosocial disability through the design and the implementation of the NDIS. For example, the NDIS price guide includes the support category increased social and community participation, which is described as a support item designed to allow mainstream and incumbent providers to offer new and innovative services to NDIS participants. Our mental health NDIS service offers our participants a range of opportunities in what the NDIS calls life transition planning and capacity building, echoing the recovery-focused and strength-based framework our sector has long followed. A focus on what people with mental health issues can do, not what they can't do. And to demonstrate that they can lead a fulfilled life with the same opportunities as other people. As we transitioned the eligible participants from our block-funded programs to the NDIS, we were committed to retain the principles of psychosocial support, to maintain a strength-based approach, and to sustain hope of recovery in the services we provided to them, despite the newly minted diagnosis of psychosocial disability. As for many of us here, it has been a very bumpy ride. For our part, we're certainly not out of the woods, but we have established an approach where we can see results if the NDIA and other parties come on board. Getting the right mix of supports in a plan is crucial though. So a plan can support recovery rather than create dependencies. This still proves to be the hardest element to achieve, but we are living in hope for increased understanding from the NDIA in this area. Our conversations with our participants are really important, future-focused and hope-inspired. This space has so much more potential in focusing on deficits. Look at the confidence in doing things for himself that John now has when refocused on his love of car racing and desire to achieve his dream of going to the Bathurst 1000. David loves footy. What better way to overcome crippling social phobia and anxiety than supporting him doing volunteering at a youth centre, helping out with some touch footy. As a result, he now has confidence to go to re-enter the workforce, and that's what he started. None of this is rocket science. We had this focus before. But what is the secret to a recovery-focused approach within an NDIS framework? We've had to stand our ground with this and be prepared to fight for it. It's the recognition of the vital role of support coordination and the importance of capacity building for recovery-focused psychosocial support for people with complex mental health issues. And to stand our ground there with our participants, because that's what they are asking of us. If we do this, we can continue to achieve results such as we've seen with John and David, and we may even be able to do it widely. But we also have to acknowledge the stress, and in many cases distress, experienced by people in firstly applying for the NDIS with its focus on deficits, and then what the plan review process puts them through each year, as if they have to come cap in hand for their continued funding and reprove their justification for that funding. And in too many cases, being squeezed in the very funding items that have yielded the greatest outcomes for them, their funding and coordination and capacity building. We could be cynical here, and it's not in all cases, but does reducing coordination to a minimum effectively divide participants from that key person and coordinator who can speak up for them and, yes, advocate for the most appropriate plan when they haven't yet found their own feet and their own voice. And who of you who have been through this process haven't felt that power differential as you sit across the table from your NDIS planner? WCS, for our part, have put our resources into building a specialised team of support coordinators with knowledge and competence in mental health. They coordinate all the external services such as cleaning, core support, therapies or referral to supported independent living services. The basics of coordinating and implementing a complex NDIS plan. But crucially in our approach, they also design capacity building activities with their participant to be delivered by our team of recovery support workers, most of whom in our case have a lived experience of mental illness and recovery. This includes individual mentoring, peer support, and assistance in individual and other skill development. They are models and mentors for the people engaging our recovery approach. Bringing these three elements together as a team, the participant, the support coordinator, the recovery support workers, this is what has enabled us to achieve these outcomes together.
So Paul's talked about our team of support coordinators, and we have actually managed to hold on to a number of our FANS workers who, of course, came from that recovery approach, but we've also lost quite a number of those specialised workers as well. The other thing that we have is our team support workers, and the NDIS has allowed us to build this team, which has been fantastic. But we know a program like ours is only as good as the people that we've got working in it and the support that we provide to those workers. So we have chosen to put a fair amount of investment in this critical group of staff. As Paul said, most of them have a lived experience of mental illness. Most of them are gaining qualifications or already hold qualifications in mental health. And particularly they need to be aligned to the values and approaches of our work. We provide them with as much support as we possibly can. We have monthly team meetings together where we do a lot of sharing of how they're working, a lot of using those as opportunities to do training and different sorts of approaches to build their abilities and capacities as workers. We acknowledge that this group of workers are working often out in the field themselves. They don't have a lot of connection with those in the office, and that makes it really tough gig for them to be actually out all day, sometimes doing 2 or 3 different shifts. It can be quite lonely, so any opportunities that we have to bring them in, if it's a cancelled shift, they come into the office, they actually use that as an opportunity to sit down with a range of sort of training programs that we've got, and to connect with others, and particularly to connect with the support coordinator. So that crucial thing is that we do actually, even though they're 2 quite different teams of workers, managed by different managers, to keep that conflict element sort of critical, we do ensure that there is communication that's going on. We also build a team around a person. We can't absolutely ensure that it's going to be the same support worker that goes and visits that person every time, but if we actually have a team of workers that participant is used to working with, that does help to create that team. So we have the support coordinator, several support workers, and then the participant themselves. And I suppose the key element of this is sitting down with that group in co-designing what the recovery activity is going to be, what those capacity building activities are going to be with the participant, making sure they're realistic and mindful of the different things at play, be it the episodic periods of mental illness, other things that are in play in the plan, what's going on in that person's life. It's also vital for our staff to have an understanding of the broader therapeutic system, the local service system, and the clinical service environment. And we're lucky we have good relationships with clinical services, and we call on clinical services as needed and try and embrace them in this process. So we feel that holistically coordinating and implementing a complex NDIS plan like John's has many other elements that we've not gone into here. But the bit that we're trying to focus on is that bit that's actually around co-designing our recovery work and using our peer workers, and that's at the heart of our enterprise when we've seen some extraordinary life-changing processes. The question is this model sustainable? Possibly not, possibly yes. We've had different times over the last 18 months where we've thought, oh, crikey, we need to throw this out. This is actually not working for us and it's really draining the organisation. And then we've had a period where things have improved. Certainly 18 months ago when we were really battling with that first big load of plan reviews, and the plans were changing and they were being cut. That was a real shock to us, and we thought we had something that was actually going to be sustainable and work for us, and then suddenly we were having to relook at what we were doing and think, oh, crikey. So we're still battling away with that, but when we do get those right things in place, and particularly that right mix in a plan, that's what we feel is the most crucial thing. And I really hope that the psychosocial disability pathway is something that brings out that those elements, and also the work of the project that MHA is doing, coordinating around those key crucial parts that need to be in somebody's plan and that can be worked with. We've talked this morning about all those different elements that are causing heartache for us all, our workforce, plan reviews, the quality of safeguards, and so on. Yes, that's all very much there and things that we're feeling as well. But we hope that with the noise that we can make as a sector, which is exactly what was said by Amanda and Louis this morning, that if we can actually stand up for what we feel is right in making the NDIS work for this particular group of participants, then we hope that those lessons that we've learned as a trial period will actually take forth and go forth. So, yeah, we live in hope that our sector voices will yield shifts in the NDIA to suit the needs of participants with psychosocial disability and allow programs such as ours to survive. Thank you.
We've got a few minutes for questions if anyone would like to ask something.
Yeah,
Don't forget to speak up.
I just want to make a comment first about fact sheets. I know many consumers and carers who are involved nationally on working groups that design those fact sheets. And I suppose it's great that they're including recovery and so forth, but then we've got to see that actually happen out in the community and through service provision. The other thing is, unfortunately, I know John, and I just wanted to add a little bit to the story in terms of peer support, which perhaps isn't factored in, and I think it's great the work that you're doing, but my son is a friend of John, and John rings my son regularly when he's having an anxiety attack because he stays up all night, doesn't take his medication, and he stays up all night and takes his medication in the morning. And my son, as a peer, has been providing that support to him for a long time as a friend, saying, listen, mate, you're not feeling well because you're not taking your medication at the appropriate time. So I think that there's a factor in the recovery that we're not thinking about, which is the support that peers and friends actually provide, especially if they themselves have gained insight and they are progressing along that pathway of recovery. And I think that needs to be looked at, and I wonder whether or not you're providing after-hours support for or follow-up for consumers when they're not feeling well, or how that's addressed through your program.
Yeah. Well, I think it has to be said we're not a crisis service, so we can't fill that gap. But we do have an after-hours service, and when our workers are on shift, shall we say, there's always someone that they can call. We absolutely get that. You know, we like to encourage not just relationships with paid workers and coordinators and what have you, but those relationships that are going to build someone's life and their confidence. And you know, I know a little bit about that background. It hasn't always been easy doing that. So this is what Pam said. It's a very complex story, and there's much work to do. The whole health area as well is the co-occurring conditions are very challenging. But a wraparound service such as ours is trying to break through that space.
Can I just caution, the stories are great and it's always really good to hear the lived experience. John actually isn't in the room with us.
No.
And I'm really concerned
Yes.
Regarding confidentiality.
Yes.
And so if we can just be aware of that in terms of safe storytelling.
Yep, absolutely. Yes, I know someone in the community who really needs to have the support of a neuropsychologist with a comprehensive assessment, and it's just about impossible to find anybody because it's going for 3 years now. So how would you go about that? Because I've been told there's restrictions if you go interstate. Yet, if you can't find the people that you really need to help a person with their functioning day-to-day disability with mental health, then you really need a comprehensive neuropsychologist psychologically.
Yeah, well, that's where we're dependent on that planning process, that review process, and to find evidence for therapies. Now, I think there's been some improvement in that there is funding for therapies, and that's been a good thing. It's never enough.
No, that's the problem. Yeah.
But that's what a good coordinator also can do, bringing in the evidence for those sorts of things that are a bit outside the box, as it were.
Can I just reassure everyone too that anybody's case studies that have been used here today, we have ensured that permission has been gained and that as far as possible the person has been de-identified. But we say that in recognition that this is a very small community, and probably, particularly the audience here today, if anyone is going to recognise who's been spoken about, it's probably people in our audience today. It is something we're very mindful of, and we had a quite extensive conversation about before we went ahead with the presentations that involve case studies. Probably one more question, if there is one.
So have you found a lot of your participants have had a reduction in funding after the first plan? And if the funding has run out, has your service been providing the same support that's ongoing, or is it just completely cut?
Yeah, well, that was a particularly challenging time that Pam alluded to last year when plans were, and that was an example, 80% slash to the funding. It's absolutely devastating. And we did a lot of advocacy behind the scenes, unfunded, did an enormous amount of that. We also continued, we'd take plans back to review, we'd take them to review, and with no guarantee that we were going to be at it, and certainly no funding for that kind of advocacy. So that's when we were on the brink. Last year we were looking down the barrel of failure here because this just tipped everything upside down. We did our best, but there's only so much we can do in that space, and that's where we need the Amandas and Louise of this world to advocate for us, of course, in MHCC.
Just to finish your question, we've also had to become much more hard-headed about doing the unfunded work. We were doing an enormous amount of it, and it nearly sent us under at the end of last year. So we've had to become much clearer about what we can do and what we can't do. We do, of course, stretch that. It's flexible at different times, but for the sake of our program, what we hope to continue to achieve for the people that are in it, we can't. We're going to try hard to keep our heads above water.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to introduce Lachlan Atyeo from Wellways. Another really important part of our report was talking about the importance of preparing people and supporting people to enter the NDIS and to test their eligibility. And Wellways, in conjunction with Imagine More and funded by the ACT government, had a very important program in terms of doing just that. Thanks, Lachlan.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm well aware that we're running a little bit behind schedule, so I will do my best not to interrupt your lunch break. So, before we begin, I'd just like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional lands of the Ngunnawal people, and I would like to pay my respects to elders past and present and anyone that might be here today as well. And I'd also like to acknowledge consumers and carers and the valuable contribution that they're paying in our sector. So quickly, for those of you who don't know who we are, Wellways is pretty big these days. We operate from Tasmania all the way up to Queensland on the eastern seaboard. We provide quite an extensive range of mental health and disability services. Most famously in ACT, we do the adult and youth step up, step down program, the detention exit community outreach program, and Partners in Recovery, as well as a number of other things in the ACT. Our vision is to have an inclusive community where everyone can imagine and achieve their hopes and potentials. And a lot of our work does sit within that space in terms of how we try and conduct ourselves. As alluded to before, Wellways, in partnership with Community Connections and Imagine More, designed and delivered the Your Voice, Your Choice project. The aim of the project was to engage key demographics in supporting them to make an application and transition to the NDIS. So those key demographics include people from culturally diverse backgrounds, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, homeless individuals, or other people who were not currently engaged with formal mental health or disability care that would likely be eligible for an NDIS package and were likely to miss out if they weren't supported to make an application in that transition. Over the course of the project, we also found that there was another group of people which were involved with formal mental health or disability care but lacked the literacy to be able to navigate through a fairly bureaucratic process. In particular, those people tend not to have a family member or someone that could help with that space as well. You can see up there some of the key undertakings of the project. So between May 2015 and December 2016, we supported 248 people in the ACT through our one-to-one conversations to transition to the NDIS. We estimate that there was actually about 316 individuals that we supported across the entire project. But as we look at today with some of the workshops and things that we ran, we had people that attended or used several aspects of the service. So the way in which we conduct ourselves in the project is we had one-to-one conversations, we had community conversations. So these were group-based presentations where we talked about the process and what the NDIS was and how it worked. And we also gave people the opportunity to share how they've managed the system and discuss with each other and do some peer kind of education in that space. We had a range of formal workshops that we provided, as well as quite an extensive amount of interagency networking, so that we were making sure that we were touching base with agencies that might come in contact with some of those key demographics. And we also produced digital stories around people's transition to the NDIS. We also had a steering committee and a peer-led working group. So this was made up of individuals with psychosocial disability, mental health backgrounds, and physical disabilities. And over the course of the project, that group helped to steer a range of the activities and the materials that we developed as well. And I think this is an important aspect of the project. In the old axiom, nothing about us without us, and we wanted to make sure that we were, operating from an informed space. So the formal workshops that we delivered were introduction to the NDIS, my goals, my choices. We had a 6-session peer education module, and we also had a self-advocacy course which was developed in partnership with the ACT Mental Health Consumer Network. The introduction to the NDIS was, unsurprisingly, the most delivered course that we did over the project. And what we really found was that people really didn't understand what it was, how it worked, and its role and function, and how it was different to the existing system and all of those sorts of challenges. The feedback on the peer education module was that it was helpful for people, but it was also somewhat overwhelming for people at 6 sessions. And I think that that's probably also in part because our experience of supporting people to transition was fairly overwhelming as well in terms of gathering evidence, navigating the system, doing all of those kinds of activities. Over the course of the project, so program 1 was Imagine More Community Connections, who were focusing on the physical disability space, and program 2 was us, focusing on the psychosocial disability space. So over the course of the project, about 35% of the total number of participants identified as being from a culturally diverse background, and another 8% of people identified as being Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. Obviously, the predominant age range being 30 to 50, followed by 50 to 64. So these are just the general deliverables for the physical disability side of the program. And as you can see, we over-delivered in each of the areas except for the networks and digital stories. What we found over the course of the project as well, and you'll see in the one-to-one conversations both on this slide and the next one, was that there was quite a significant over-delivery in that space. People need a lot of help to get into the NDIS, to navigate the system, to find the evidence that they need, and all of those kinds of things. The one-to-one sessions range from 1 to 12 hours of support in some of the most challenging or difficult cases, as it were. Most people used about 4 to 5 hours of support in that space, and we delivered somewhere in the order of about 740 hours of support in just the one-to-one conversation space. We had, and it was approximately about 11 or 12% of the people that accessed the service that required 8 to 12 hours of support in order to transition. And most of that was actually in the form of post making their ARF, actually working with them to work out, what their goals were, what the supports they needed were, and then how to find and gather that evidence so that they were able to demonstrate that they were, requiring that support. Through this process, what Peter learned was that what we had thought we were going to do going in was not what we needed to do over the course of the project. We had thought that the workshops and the sort of more formal education things would be the most helpful aspect of the project for people, but the one-to-one individual support obviously turned out to be quite significant for most people. We did have a fairly high number of individuals that came into the program through a workshop or a community conversation, and then after participating in that, went through to actually requiring one-to-one support. We did have to renegotiate the contract a couple of times just to change some of those things. So what you're looking at here is the final version of those key deliverables. And we also found that the literacy and understanding of the NDIS, as I've alluded to before, was basically non-existent. We had to spend a lot of time with people helping them to understand what actually the NDIS did. We had a fair number of stories like this where people were not used to having choice in matters like it, so it was really, really good. But we also found that when you go from having not a lot of choice to suddenly a huge range of choice, people didn't really know what to do with that either, and in some ways that was almost as disabling as having no choice at all for some people. So what did we learn? It became apparent that people needed more than a single session to prepare for the NDIS. When we originally designed the project, we thought that most people who would need a one-to-one support would need 1 to 2 sessions in order to gain the information and support they needed to do that. Wasn't the case. We also found that assertive outreach was really key to engaging some of those hard-to-reach demographics. Unsurprisingly, if you're not involved in formal mental health care, you're not going to just go and put your hand up and say, "Oh, I'd like to learn more about the NDIS." And it takes a really long time to prepare and transition to the NDIS, which I think is probably not a surprise to anybody who's here today. We also found, as I've mentioned, that most people didn't understand what the NDIS was, and we had to spend a lot of time really drilling down with people as to what their expectations were, what their understanding of things were, and helping to shape that stuff. We'd often get, I guess, a lot of confused understanding in the sense, for example, person one got funding to say remodel their bathroom. Because they actually had a physical disability, which meant that their bathroom was not suitable or fit for purpose in terms of workers coming in to support them and look after them. And person number two would say, oh, okay, I'd like to get my bathroom remodeled as well because it's kind of old and manky or whatever. And the NDIS says, no, we're not paying for that. And then they go, oh, but so-and-so got their bathroom done, or there's so many stories of people having these other things done. And so there was a lot of misunderstanding, confusion about what is paid for and what isn't paid for. And the other, I guess, big thing there is it's always about evidence. If you want something done, you need to present the evidence. And so people turning up and saying, hey, I'd like X, Y, or Z, they didn't have evidence to back it up, the NDIS was going to say, no, not interested. We also found that the navigation process was incredibly difficult for people. I don't know if anyone's seen any recent articles in the Canberra Times about the rates of the dropout from the NDIS here in the ACT, or challenges in accessing the services for people coming out of correctional settings, but navigation is a huge issue. And that's, we found very compounded where you go speak English as your first language, or you have, the big core literacy. The process of gathering the evidence and deciding what you want to achieve with the NDIS as well is really draining and taxing for people. So it often just takes a long time in terms of helping people to work out what it is that they need and they want, and then about finding that evidence for it. And we thought we knew how big a challenge this was going to be, and we were very wrong. So that was an important thing for us, was to learn to temper ourselves a little bit in terms of time frames and how long it was going to take and how many challenges we were facing. Most people had to be coached through the planning stage and coached through the process of actually being able to sit down with the package planning person and say, this is what I want, this is my goals, and this is where I want to be. And that people needed a lot of coaching through that particular stage. And again, as I mentioned, gathering evidence to support the claim of disability was very challenging for people. One of the things that we often see, in the mental health space is people present themselves as the self-evident, example of the challenges they have in their life. You turn up to a meeting in a wheelchair, people don't really challenge whether or not you're able to walk or not. Turn up to a meeting and say, I've got all these, problems and there's no evidence, it's not accepted. And that, you require reports and documentation and histories and all of those kinds of things. And again, we look at the criteria for the psychosocial disability. One of those criteria is the inability to communicate, particularly around needs. And also you often see disorganisation as one of the key criteria as well. So if you're trying to expect someone who's not familiar with the system, doesn't have the skills to navigate the bureaucracy, who's suddenly then required to go and find evidence because the previous evidence that they had been themselves is no longer acceptable, you can see how it creates a situation where it's very challenging for people to be able to effectively get the support that they need. And we also found that the gathering process is very different for the psychosocial disability compared to people with a physical disability as well. I am pleased to say that we managed to transition everybody that came through the project to the NDIS. And we had a few, at the time that we finished in December 2016, I think we had about 6 people that hadn't yet transitioned, and we stayed with them until they were through. So that was really fantastic. And the 13.5% of people who could identify alternative places to source support, that seemed like a very small number. So we're glad that there was something there to actually assist the majority of people who couldn't have done this otherwise. In raw numbers, that worked out to be 33 people. As I've repeatedly mentioned, One-on-one supports were really important, and it was one of the, I guess, the major learnings that we had from this was around the level and intensity of support that people need to transition. I think that it still remains a problem today, and a number of providers are, I'm sure it's not limited to us, will often help people with that stuff with no expectation of payment or doing it as a free service, but it is a challenging space to be, because when you're operating in an environment where everything is fee for service, everything is about, you can't just give people stuff for free unless you have to take a very serious look and say, how affordable is this? And it creates some really challenging spaces where morally we might want to say, this is the correct decision. And then we have to say, well, actually, can we afford to make that decision as well? At the end of the day, staff still need to be paid, bills need to be paid, and financial obligations still need to be covered. We also found that, particularly in the psychosocial space, people had a lot of challenges with being able to identify what it is they actually needed and what they wanted, and that they needed a lot of support in terms of working through that and being coached through that process. Part of one of the outcomes of the project was to produce some resources to assist people, and we produced a document which we called the NDIS Toolkit. And at the time that it was released, it was designed to be a companion document to the NDIS planning process, which identified the basic steps people would need to think about and what actions they would need to take in order to match up to the criteria going through the planning process. I do have some of those documents left over, which will be available at the back of the table. However, they're from an old print run, so I can't say that they're 100% up to date with current information, but they're there if anybody's interested. We also found as well that the first review time was that a lot of work needed to go into priming people for that as well. Again, it's a new process. Everyone who came through the program, of course, was provided with information about the agencies and support services and things that were available. And we developed a range of materials that we gave to people throughout the project, and those were also available publicly. Moving on. So, at the end of the project, we surveyed people periodically throughout the project, both at the time that they were engaged, midpoint, and then towards the end of the support that they received. And this is what we found. That 98% of people showed a positive increase in their knowledge and understanding of NDIS. And then a further 12% of those stated that they felt it was a significant increase in knowledge. That 96% of people felt more confident in applying for the NDIS. And then again, a further 19 of that, 96 felt significantly more confident. And 95% of people who accessed the service said that they knew where to access support post being part of the project if they needed support with accessing the NDIS. And then again, a further 15% said that they felt significantly more confident about where to source support. Some of the materials that we released or developed over the course of the project, which were then released at the time, just up there. And all of these things were developed with consumer and share input and adherent to the principles of co-design. In the general disability space, again, we had some fairly similar results around people feeling confident that they knew what they had to do to make their application to the NDIS. And in the general psychosocial disability space as well, again, fairly high levels of confidence around managing things. So, 18 months on, what's changed? Not much, actually. Transition still takes a very long time. Even more so if you're from a marginalised group. So I don't think it's any surprise to people that the psychosocial disability space is still not really well understood. And what we're also seeing in the scheme is fairly inherent flaws in being able to manage people that have a disability which is episodic in nature. If you have a physical disability that's fairly well understood, we can often chart the course of support. So if you have MS, for example, and you develop it at the age of 30, we know that over the course of your life, what's roughly going to happen to you and where supports are likely to need to be increased over time in order to support you to manage. When your disability is episodic, it's much harder for the scheme to understand how to cope with that. Particularly if in year one you don't need to use all of your funding, but then in year two you actually need to use all of your funding. It's a really significant challenge, and as Paul alluded to as well, convincing the NDIA to leave money available to people because they haven't used it is a huge battle, huge battle. And early on as well, I think it did take the sector, particularly the mental health sector, a little while to sort of wrap its head around how the scheme worked. And so, after the first year, a lot of people hadn't used all of their plans, and it wasn't because they didn't want to; it was because they hadn't had that opportunity to do so. So, trying to have those arguments about keeping people in place, their funding in place, is a pretty big challenge. We're still seeing people fall through the gaps, and they appear to be getting larger. And the scheme still doesn't adapt well to the needs of more marginalised individuals, particularly people who are homeless or people from backgrounds where there's a lot of family involved in that person's care or in that sort of thing, and you actually need to deal with the family sometimes as much as you need to deal with the person. And obviously the scheme doesn't pay for those things. If you're not spending time one-to-one with that person, you don't get paid for it. Everything for me. Any questions? Thank you.
No questions for Lachlan about the plan?
Is the program still running?
No, the program is not still running. So it was only funded for the period of May 2015 to December 2016.
Yeah.
The resources that we've developed are all still available, and we also do provide support, much like the scheme, through our NDIS team.
The learnings that you had, do they implement that pre-planning type support and transition support in other states where it's rolling out at the moment? Do you know? Or is it just an ACT?
This was an ACT-based project, not to my knowledge. I do know that Wellways, as an organisation, has taken the learnings from this and applied it in all the states and territories that we operate, but I can't speak for anyone else.
So from where you stand now, Lachlan, I mean, obviously there's not the huge amount of population transitioning in. Would you see still a need for this sort of program on a smaller scale, obviously, but in terms of the
absolutely. I think so. Yeah, I think that there is still a clear need for a service like this to exist, and it would be great to see something in that space. I think, again, when we look at the NDIS and the scope and scale of it, what we anticipated, in terms of people accessing the scheme versus what actually we're seeing people, in terms of the numbers of people we see accessing the scheme are vastly different. And I think that, we will still continue to see applications made to the scheme over time, and then a lot of those people will need support.
Just from the task force, ACT NDIS task force perspective, worked really closely with Wellways and with Jan and Community Connections through this programme. And I think to acknowledge actually the work that the project did, we were anticipating between 700 and 900 people would be eligible for the scheme, compared to the 350 or so people we thought were in NDIS type programs. We're now in the situation in the ACT where there's nearly 750 people in the scheme getting supports. So that's over double the amount of people that are actually receiving services, and acknowledging the work of Wellways and the team in getting us to that situation. So thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. We've now got a break for lunch. If you could all be back and maybe start again at 1:30, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
No worries.